now there's only one settlement, so we can grab it from there. And eventually we'll have the villager, I belong to this settlement, so I'm going to ask that settlement to register me on the homelessness list. So we'll need some kind of register homeless villager function. Villager. And we'll figure out how to unregister them later. Big thing here is just that we're setting up the information, and the information is becoming available. For example, everybody, why don't we're just going to have everybody start out homeless, and then we'll clear things in as we go. Also, as we load things in, the loading path is different from the actual pre-processed path. So for now, we can say, yeah, if a new person joins the world, they're always going to be homeless until we can place them in a home. And that's kind of the lazy way to do it. Eventually, we might do something like create family groups and try and station a family group in a house on its own. One thing at a time, though. Diero, I learned C++ at a college. Specifically, college and then university. I went to community college for a couple of years. Went to university for a couple of years. Got taught by some good and some bad professors as well. I had my fair share of both. Wouldn't we want to have an array of open housing? A settlement consists of housings. The settlement definitely, let's see. An array of open housing. That way, when a house becomes available, the AI should be the one saying, I live here. I mean, that's kind of the, let's see, he registers himself on the list. A house will become available. I will then go through the, I'll think about it while I keep coding. Thorena's making a really good point. I just want to make sure I'm doing this right, but I'm also going to keep kind of slugging away as I go, and I'll be thinking about it. So I'm sorry if my brain goes off on tangents like this, because I kind of forgot what I was in the middle of right now. There we go. Villager controller. Specifically, do I have a game world already unrolled in here? I do not. Do I have access to the game world at all? Yes, I definitely do. Also, I should not use the world manager. Here, I can get my owning get world. Get target. Oh, there we go. That's what I need. I have my target node, which I called root node for some reason. Bizarre, but okay. Root node, get world. Now we have our game world. And we can close that. There we go. Game world. Get settlement group node. Get controller. And this is going to be our settlement controller. Is that. Then from the settlement controller, this is where some of the magic will happen. So the settlement controller can do one of two things. We can either have a list of homeless people, but that kind of doubles up on information that we already know. So I don't like that. I actually like what Thorena is saying, if only because it makes more sense. Let's see here. I'll put... Can I do node pointers? No. I think what I want... So for now, the quarters controller... There we go. And here's our housing array. And I guess we'll say it's our open housing array. So what's going to end up happening is houses are going to be smart enough to register themselves to this open housing array if they exist and have open housing. So when somebody dies, the house will unregister that person and then add itself back to the open housing array. A person who is homeless should then, on either intervals or on a certain event, be able to say, housing has been opened up. I should look at the open housing array. And the open housing array will then say, oh look, here's a house with 4, here's a house with 2, here's a house with 5, and here's a house with 1. And the person will say, I want to take up the house that has the least available space that I will fit. So if I have a family of 4, I obviously can't take up the houses that have 1, 2, and 3 spaces. But if there's a house with 4 spaces, I'll be happy to take that one. If there's a house with 5 spaces, so say there's only houses with 1, 2, 3, and 5 spaces, they'll say, fine, 5 is the only one I fit in, so I will take the house with 5 spaces. And then somebody else can later come along and say, I'm the only guy around, I'm a single guy, I'm going to fit myself into any of these houses with 1 left. They don't really care that they live with another family or not. So that's kind of my logical thought on how this would work, is you have 2 sides of the equation. You have the buildings attaching themselves to the open housing list, and then you have people who on events will say, oh, it's time to look for a new home. And, my old home's been burnt down, or my new home, or I've just been born into this world, I need a home. Therefore, I'm going to look for open homes. And that is, I think, how I like that to go. Theren is saying that maybe the settlement controller could be the one to hook up people with houses. That's a possibility. That would definitely solve the interval problem. How often does a person check for new housing? Rev has an interesting thought on how to fit a large family into a small house. Let's see here. So this would be register new home, or register open housing, I should say. And this will take a quarters controller. Here's our home. And this is very basic, so I don't mind going in and dumping this in the header file. So okay. We have the house needs to be able to attach itself. So this is our quarters controller. Whoop. There we go. Specifically in this preprocess function, we are going to get the target node, get the world based off that target node, do all this static casting. This is kind of messy, and I do wish there were a better way to do this, but at the moment I can't think of one. So I'm just going to keep going with this. There's a little bit of poor architecture going on in this game that I need to work on, but for now, the game works. So I don't really feel the need to do another major refactoring. I just redid the entire terrain system, trying to keep my refactoring to a minimum, otherwise this game will never get done. Get the settlement group node, and then we're going to get the controller attached to that. Get the settlement controller pointer. I'll just call it settlement for now. That's that. We need to cast this to the correct type. There we go. We now, once we have the settlement, we're going to say, hey look, we exist. So settlement, register us as open housing. It's always a good sign when you call a function and you can use this pointer to specify ownership of things. It's always nice when you're able to do that. So the settlement says, I should register myself. Then the settlement... okay, here we go. Here we go. My brain's starting to work now. the settlement controller, which is at the end of this file, is going to be observable. And let's think of the event here. Is there any specific event data we want to pass? Not yet. We can expand this later. But the big thing is the settlement controller is going to become observable. And each villager controller, as they exist, which is in our pre-process step, the settlement controller will exist and the villager will begin to watch that settlement controller. So, do I already have another... No, I don't? Okay. I thought I had another observer in here, but I guess I don't. Which is fine. We can... Interesting. Yeah, we can do without. This will be a observer, and it will observe, let's see here, observer type and the observable type. So villager controller followed by, this is where things get interesting. Oh crap. So you need to know about the settlement controller in order for this to work. The problem is controllers.h is included in or villager controller.h is included in controllers.h. In order to get to the settlement controller, we would need to add controllers.h into the villager controller, and that would generate a lovely, lovely circular dependency, of which I'd rather not fight with right now. This was going so well. So very well. I have one of these somewhere else. How did I structure that before? Tree controllers within a cell. And then the observable, let's see, tree controller has a reveal observer, which is attached to a cell. Funny. Class cell. So it doesn't have a direct attachment to what a cell is, except through the villager. No, who the hell has an attachment to a cell that you have access to? This is so bizarre. There's a dependency here that is unnamed, right? We have a cell controller here, but if you look through this list, villager controller doesn't have access to cells. I have an unnamed dependency here, and it's kind of breaking me inside a little bit. Effects, I don't think has... No, that definitely doesn't. Items, I don't think does either. No. AI would be the only one. So it goes AI, game world, cells. Oh my gosh. That's a painful dependency list right there. And then... Oh, I see how that's single directional. I understand. So I'm trying to think of other information that could eventually get packed into the settlement. Because if I can figure out what other information exists, what we can do is we can figure out how to kind of cut up the class structure so that it fits a little better. So on the upside, the settlement controller knows absolutely nothing about what a villager is. So what we, I think, need to do is break the settlement controller out to its own file that doesn't have the villager controller dependency directly. And that should let us get away with this. I think that's the way to do this. Do I recommend any videos or tutorial series on C4? Unfortunately, not really. I learned it kind of the hard way. I was working with this engine in a... Oh, what's it called? It was a game design experience class. And we were forced over a certain period of time to... I say forced. We were told that we would fail if we didn't do this project. Also, that the project would be a couple quarters long, and that we, over the course of the several quarters, had to make a game in its entirety. So we ended up learning a lot simply by spending a lot of time in the code, really. Unfortunately, I don't have a good set of tutorials or videos. The only one I know of is on the forums. There is the C4 forums, I should say. Somebody has made a like how-to for C4. It's just a simple like C4 for dummies almost. Apparently people say that's a really good book for this engine specifically. So hopefully that helps. This is what you get when you architect an engine as you're, or a game as you're making it. Makes it a little more difficult sometimes. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I have made up my mind. Settlement, game code. We're just gonna copy the villager controller. And tack these into the game. Also, I'm going to go so far as to actually add a new filter called controllers. And I'm going to take these files and slap them into this filter just to make life a little easier for me. I like having things organized, easy to find. Yeah. That'll make life easier. I've also got some trail mix next to me. Although I don't have any water, I may need to run off and grab some water in a moment because all this talking is not doing my throat any favors. I now understand why Day 9 always had tea in front of him and was just constantly drinking it. Alright. Let's get packing. This is our settlement controller. And like Jon Snow, it needs to know nothing. Or at least very little. We are going to break into the H file here. Take this out. Put that there. We're going to take our little itty bitty settlement controller here. And I'm just going to take this entire class now it does need to know what the quarters controller is. So we do need to include controllers. Ooh, that throws a wrench into the works. This CPP file, settlement controller, does not need, interesting, all this stuff here. We can actually get away with nothing here. We need to take, where is it? The settlement controller code. Oops, I was in the wrong spot. Controllers, there we are. Did I not write any code for this? I could have sworn I had. I really could have sworn I had. Oh well. Controller. And you take a C4 controller. Okay. You need to give it the controller type. Let's see here. Ah, right. This now needs to know what a settlement controller is. Quarters controller. You should know what a quarters controller is from the controllers.h file. Yeah, I think I've still got a circular dependency going on here. I think the villager controller, including the... Let's see here. Yeah, because villager includes settlement, settlement includes controllers, and controllers includes villager. So as long as the quarters controller also resides within the controllers file, I've got a problem. I may end up splitting more of these out into their own files than I really wanted to initially. Okay, question. Does the quarters controller need to know about anything? It does. It knows about the villager controller. But what we can do really easily here is use a base class here and remove the need for villager controller specifically, and then we just check at compile time, or not at, sorry, at runtime, to make sure we're not doing anything silly. So, it's a little messy, but it solves our circular dependency, and a little bit of work should be able to clean this up later. Honestly, I probably should have had all my little controllers in their own files as I made them. I'm not really sure if that's true, but it seems like something that I should have done way back when anyway. I'm still trying to kind of evaluate whether that's a true or false statement. Let's see here. Okay, quarters controller. I need all the quarters controller code out of controllers.cpp as well. Also, you need to include R2. Well, no, not yet. Oddly enough. I just need this. So the upside is, if you look at this file, it's already 600 lines long. This keeps our one file from becoming stupidly, ungodly large. Same time, if you break things into too many little files, it becomes somewhat problematic to do a lot of the work later, because you end up hunting for which file things live within. So instead of, I look for my controllers in controllers.h, it's, I need to look for this specific controller which lives within this specific file, and that could be a pain in the ass. Yeah. Is what it is. Circular dependencies suck. Sometimes you have to find crazy ways around them. This is one of those times. I'll probably just clean it up off stream, how it goes. Honestly, what I should have here is I should have AI, not just in its own file, but broken up by its dependencies, so that the different pieces of AI can have their own needs without requiring me to draw in all these different dependencies as well. Right? Let's see. The other thing to do would be to remove the villager controller from controllers.h so that the villager controller could then have access to things. I actually don't see okay, so the resource the resource source container needs to know what a villager controller is. The tree controller needs to know what a villager controller is, if only so it can hand out information, so it can hand out resources. And that comes from this resource source container, this collect resource. Farm plot is the same way. Berry bush is the same. So that's really the only things that are using this information in this way. Are resources that need to, when the villager says, I need to gather your resource, they hand off the information to the villager. Yeah, I think that's fine. I might end up renegotiating the new files I create to kind of minimize the risk of running into this again later. But one thing at a time. Let's get our new feature in. So you need to include the quarters controller. Oh, you need a name. Specifically, for now, let's just put a settlement controller here. And what we could do is we could also decouple this from knowing our controller type. So we could do this and just hand it a base controller and know that whenever we need to access something specific within the settlement controller, we actually just have to cast it to the right type. And that would be another way to decouple these from one another. Cannot define a compiler-generated special method. This is... oh. There we go. Oh, and it's not void. That's just a muscle memory reaction at this point. Also, let's not make that observable. Yes, we want this to be observable. It's funny, there's a bunch of ways we can handle this, and I'm trying to handle it in like 3 different ways all at once. I need to decide on a function, or decide on a method, and then go through and fix that method. Because I've got all these files cracked open at this point. I need to figure out how to do this. Do quarters and settlements need to know about each other? Only in the CPP file. Okay. Okay, so here's how it's going to go down. We're going to have an observer who's a villager controller, and yes, we will need to know what the settlement controller is. Then, in here, let's see here. Handle settlement. For now, I'll call it handle settlement message. Handle settlement event. I think it has to take a settlement controller pointer. Come on. There we go. Shift key didn't want to function for some reason. So here's our housing controller. Here's our settlement controller, which also starts as a null pointer. On pre-processing, for now, we're going to get lazy and just say your settlement controller with 2 T's, not 3. There we go. And we're also going to grab the settlement controller. And let's see, where is it? Add observer, where the observable type is this. Observer base, who is controller and event type. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the settlement observer. We need to hand it a pointer, so we need to dereference the sucker. And then at the top, our settlement observer needs to take in 2 things. It needs to take in the observer type, which is this, and it also needs to take in a pointer, which will be the villager controller pointer to that handle event that we are going to write. Ambiguous access. Ambiguous access to what? Oh god, is like controller already an observer of some kind? That would be frightening. Controller is not... yes, controllers are observable, because controllers can intercept events. Crap. That's fine. We can just specifically name things and go that route. Specifically that when we say add observer, let's see here. It's already observable because controllers can send events. I wonder if I can leverage that. We're going to grab the API for a moment and look at their... let's see here. There's an event system hiding in here. The message manager. Controller messages. So I think this is all purely... what's funny is there's like a way to do this and use their controller message sending to do not just multiplayer, but to use it for their single player stuff, which is kind of funny. And that would be the way and place to do it, I think. Because you can send a controller message, and what that ends up doing is the controller message ends up sending out, yeah, the controller then calls receive message, which then acts like an event getting sent, and that's what that event type is, I believe. Let's see if we can look at that. Controller add observer. A movement controller. Move to start function. Interesting. It looks like it's being used for the scripting system. So there's a way to unambiguously define this. Specifically, we would say this is a... crap. It's a C4 observable, which uses the villager controller very specifically. Oh, this is the observable type, though. So it would be the settlement controller pointer. Or not pointer, just settlement controller. And that's it. And of course I can't spell settlement. Let's see here. I have to get the syntax right or else it's going to complain the entire time. No suitable user-defined conversion from an observer of these types to an observer of this type. You are an observer with villager controller, settlement controller. And this has the observable type attached, yes. From this to this. And this is the observable function being attached. Dang it. Lovely, lovely attachments here, where having multiple observables attached to this is creating a funky tree. Because what I want to do is have it register an event, and essentially the event would be, hey, new housing's available. And when new housing becomes available, that's when the note goes out to all the villagers, and the villagers can then jump in and say, hey, I'm going to go look for new housing. Threat, the engine isn't normally this bad. It's just every once in a while you run into funny cases like this where obviously something's a little unhappy. Oh, and here's why. I got it. We need to do this in 2 steps. So the settlement needs to be set in 1 step. And this actually isn't an engine issue. This is just an ambiguous, like, C++ problem in general. There we go. So the problem is that if you look at the settlement controller, it's a generic C4 controller type. You can't actually add in a basic observer of type other stuff because this observer is very specific. So we were running into a problem where we were finding ambiguity because the types weren't casted correctly. This should be at least closer to what we need. And what we need to do okay, so we've got that set. We are now adding an observer. This shouldn't be ambiguous anymore. That's the funny thing. You are very obvious. True. I guess that is the case, Thorena. If I were to write my own, I would have, less problems, and I wouldn't be colliding with engine usages, and that is a good reasoning to use my own. But, not the end of the world that I have to figure this out. Makes me think a little more. Let's see here. I don't think that will help. We need to come through here and somehow choose which of these two functions we are going to be making use of, because it falls under both, unfortunately. And our settlement observer, let's just look at this once more here. The problem is it's communication between controllers. Even if I'm trying to send a very basic message, it's still communication between controllers, which this add observer, yeah, this is just always going to be ambiguous between the two use cases, because we don't know if it's going to be between the two types that we've currently defined. Unless, can I jump in and say, maybe I do need to do this somewhat differently because of this collision. I wonder if I can actually do it by sending. Send, let's see here, message. So there's a receive message function. We might be able to just send a controller message across. I just need to figure out how I would do that. API, help me. Controller messages, how do you get used? Okay. I'm not sure I like that because it looks like packet format is what it expects. So it expects something like a message that can be defined in a packet-like function. I'm not a huge fan of that. I would honestly just have a function directly call, or an event directly call all of its observers. Let's see here. So let's see here. Here's a thing from the engine creator on how I should be using this. So, the problem is he doesn't really solve the issue at hand, which is that when we look at this, there's two that it could possibly be subscribing to, and we need to say, no, use this one specifically. So what I need to do is I need to bottle this up so our pointer gets turned into something specific. And we need to say, this is specifically an observer whose types are not the ambiguous ones it's looking for. I specifically say it is a type who is going to be observing a settlement controller and a void. It's interesting that it's not no suitable constructor exists to convert from an observer of one type to an observer of another. What? Oh, whoops. Villager controller. Settlement controller. But that's what it already is. I shouldn't have to... Okay, this observable function, when we say add observer, what are we doing? It takes an observer type. An observer type is listed as an observer base with a type and an event type. This is C4. The observable type, the type being observed, is the settlement controller and void. And that's what it looks like it should be accepting. Ambiguous access. Gosh darn it. Dum-dum. It's funny, it always seems to fall back to the same exact thing every single time. My settlement observer needs to fall under a certain type when I say add observer. Is add observer part of the observable type, actually? Come to think of it. API. No, API documentation. I'm sorry, come back. The observer, no, I'm sorry, observable. Yeah, it's an add observer function. Interesting. Okay, well, I'm tired of this. So, we're going to, let's see, what's going on in chat. Just write a function, register housing interest. You don't iterate over all the observables anyway. True, yeah. So our settlement will need to register, not just open, let's see. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same information we're storing, so I kind of understand what Theren is saying by registering a function, or using a register function, and then just calling through to everybody in the list, where we have this array of, I guess, villager controllers. Now, I don't think... Oh, I see, but because okay. That's fine. Housing interest array. Void register housing interest, which is done by a villager controller. Housing interest. So this is going to get a little more complex, so I'm going to break this out into a function that's going to live out here, because it's fairly empty and sad anyway. Register open housing. So we take the quarters, we throw that in there. We then say for int I equals 0, I is less than the housing interest array. We are just going to dive through each person in this interest array and say, hey, here's our event. Specifically, this should be like a handle housing interest. So the only reason I like the observer pattern over this is that the observer pattern allows us to have functions that decouple us from the type. So the observer allows us to register a function with the observer, and then we don't worry about the types that are coming and going so much, only about who has access to that observer. And it keeps us from fighting with details such as stuff like the circular dependency loop that I was just kind of caught in a short while back. I don't know. Not the end of the world. Villager controller. Sorry, observer, but out you go. Where does this go? Let's just put it at the bottom. Yeah. So the villager controller is going to have some handle settlement event. For now, it's empty, but we can pass other types into it later. The big thing here is that the villager should then say, hey, I should look for housing. In fact, let's call this a handle settlement housing event. Big long name, yes, but more specific to what's going on. And we will just hand it the open housing array. And that should be fine. Why are you complaining? Because I put the wrong types in here. What is this an array of? It is an array of quarters, right? Quarter controller. Pointers. Come on. We'll say that's a reference. A constant reference. No, it can't be constant because we're going to be changing things inside of it. Well, except, no. Okay, it's not. It's a constant reference because we can't change the array. That's fine. So this will be our housing array. There we go. I like that much better. Much mo better. To use the worst possible grammar possible. Haha, see what I did there? And then the settlement controller needs one more thing. Disoko is asking why I'm not for eaching through it. I guess I could for each through this one. Habit, I guess. Quarters. I need to get in the habit of doing this, though. Other way around. The villager controller pointer. Not in the open housing array, but in the housing interest array. There we go. I don't actually know if this gives us much extra anything, but no reason why not to. Now the reason I'm going to use an actual standard for loop here instead of the for each loop you see above is because when you change the actual length of the object that you're iterating through, you don't want to have a for each loop on that one. Otherwise, you end up with unfortunate iterators, and I don't want to fight with those. So if let's see here. And our controllers are, oop, that's not in there anymore, so I shouldn't. Our quarters controller, though, should have an integer that has available space. And we need a getter for this. Not void, int get available space, return available space. Minus, I guess I should say, this should be our total space. Total tenant, max, not total, max tenant count. Minus the current tenant count. There we go. I don't think I need access to this for now, so we should be fine. Just that get available space. And if this is 0, then we're going to remove it. I minus minus I. Alright, so we need to fill in a little bit more and then we'll be done. For housing array, we're just going to do a stupid setup for now, and then we'll make it smarter later. For example, see, I'm learning to use those for each loops. It's just taken me a little to get in the habit of using them when I can. If quarters get available space, for now I'll just use a greater than 0 check. Once again, we can make this smarter later. Quarters, register tenant, me, and then break out. Right, you can go away. Register tenant is undefined. Oops. That's pretty simple stuff, though. We just current tenants, add element, the new villager, and the unregister. If, let's see here, index equals current tenants find element villager. Oh. If index is less than 0, I guess I should do, yeah, if it's less than 0, return. I don't need those braces anymore. Otherwise, current tenants dot remove element at the index. We done. Cool. So I just kind of want to see this in action, and then we should be good to go. Let's see, settlement controller. Oh, we need to make sure a settlement controller is ending up on that group node too. Otherwise, it won't be around to actually do the hard work that we want it to. Settlement group node equals this. Okay. C4, not C4, just settlement. Actually, we can just do group node set controller new settlement controller, because there's nothing really attached to that, right? Doesn't really need a name. Cool. Add new. should jump into the settlement controller. There's nothing for it to really call. That's fine. The quarters, when it gets created, we need to attach that as well to our quarters object, which I don't think I registered it in the controllers file. Controller reg, specifically the quarters controller registration. Okay, controller quarters controller. And then it doesn't have a valid... Oh, we haven't filled in the valid node function. Well, it's the same as the storage shed. So we can just copy and paste this, luckily. I did put that in the H file though, didn't I? Yeah, I did. That's why it's complaining, of course. Okay. There's our open. There's that. There's our shut. There. There we go. Cool. Trying to think of anything else. The only other thing in here... Oh. Maximum tenant count is never getting set. That needs to happen. Specifically, the way it should happen is very specific as well. This should be something data-driven if we can help it. Where are those functions? I know they exist in here somewhere. Really? Get setting count. So what we're going to do is we're going to expose this to the editor. We're going to make it available to set in editor so we can have a type of controller attached to multiple different object types. And I know I've got this set in game code somewhere. Get setting count. Sure, we can use the scout area subtask. So that's in the AI file. Hey. Specifically, where are you? This trio right here. These suckers. Also, I actually need more than that. I just realized I need the pack and unpack functions as well, so that they can end up inside of the actual world file as well. So that information not only gets tucked away, but stays packed away. Let's see here, game code. Okay, villager controller has the pack and unpack stuff, so I can use his. I should say I can use his arguments. I'm not going to be copying and pasting the insides of this function, just these three. Oh, and it's got the whole set. Okay, cool. So this is what I need to end up out here. And it may seem like a lot, but it's actually pretty simple stuff. And it is very helpful to have all of this defined. In fact, we can even look at the villager controller to make sure that everything is ending up in a way that we expect it to. Pack handle, name, and chunk. Huh. Interesting. I think the big thing to keep in mind here is that we've got chunk headers followed by terminators. That's really all we need to know about this. Begin chunk, end chunk. Yeah, okay, cool. So, settlement controller can kind of bugger off for now while we write all this stuff. Specifically, we'll have a header. The header will be max tenant count. How many David Tennants can you fit in this house? He's pretty skinny, probably a lot. We also need a good initializer here. Max tenant count. Let's say the base is going to be 4. No, we'll set it to 0 by default, just so if something goes wrong, it really goes wrong. Also, that should be a comma, not a... There we go. Not a colon. That's really all we need. Like I said, pretty simple. This we call unpack chunk. Actually, first I think we need to call the standard controller unpack. I've done this before, and if you really mess this one up, this is one that will make your game very unhappy. It won't just crash, it'll crash in bad places if you mess up some of the serialization and deserialization code. There we go. Unpack chunk is where the magic happens. Specifically, we switch, we get the type, and then we can output the data. So, if the type happens to be, hey, this only thing that exists, then we're going to put that out there. Otherwise, we return false at the end. Yes? Yes. Good. And this makes it easy for us to add data later as well. This isn't just like a one-time, oh, look, it's done, that's it. It allows us to quickly and easily go in later, and if we need to add more information, such as how much health does this house have left since it's burning down, stuff like that, it makes it a little easier for us to kind of hop in and do our stuff. And my music has stopped. Let's get that restarted. There we go. Hey Danu, Dan Zero, I don't know. Hey Dan, what's up? There come points when, in attempting to pronounce people's stream names, I just kind of go, hi, you person, who's like, I recognize this couple letters, I'll just say this. Return C4. I don't think the controller has much here, but we're just going to do this by the books anyway. It's just Dan? Cool. Hi, just Dan. How's it going? Alright, get setting if the index, I really cannot type right now. Let's just check this real quick. I don't think this needs to be here. Can we peek at the definition? Okay. Come on, Visual Studio. You can do it. Find me what I want to know. If this works, this will be one of the few times I've actually seen Visual Studio do what I ask it to do. It's taking a long time. Oh, and it failed. Thank you. Oh, but it looks like it gathered up all the usages of it in H files, though. Not what I wanted. Luckily, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is not in the engine, really? Okay, well, everyone else is doing it this way, so I'm just going to do it that way too. So I'm going to go for runter or renter. Renter? I don't know. Ranter? I don't know. Mr. 200 here. What is the C4 doing? It's the engine namespace. Everything that's engine-based lives in that C4 namespace. So If you see me call C4 double colon, it's something that exists in the engine, which lets me know, I should not be looking for this object in my own code. This will be an integer setting. Really? Oh, you know what? It's because. I shouldn't say cuz, I should say because. Also, you should not be up there. You should be down here. C4 configurable. Integer setting. Wrong one. Configuration. There it is. There it is. And we need a new one of these, whose identifier will be that, whose value is the maximum tenant count. Max tenant count. Minimum is always 0. We don't want it to go below 0. Rentee. Yeah, rentee would be a good term, I guess. Tenant kind of assumes... tenant works as well. Maximum. For now, we're not going to do anything too insane. Actually, let's not go that high, just because I don't think I'll ever... No, why not? Give myself the option to. There we go. And then when we say set setting, here's the other one I have to look up. Set setting. We do this. Once again, though, I think these are empty, so there's really no need to call them. Otherwise, I'd see them here. Yeah. Alright, max, let's get this right. Max tenant count is equal to a constant, not Boolean, but integer setting. Also, we need to make sure that these match. And it's not get Boolean value, it's get integer value, and that should do the trick. Generally, the placement of those things in the header file was personal reasons. That doesn't make really any difference. That was just me getting picky about what order they're in. My personal style tends to be that I include, if it's a CPP file, or I should say if it's a source file, right? Because this doesn't just apply to C++, this applies to any way I program. If it's any source file, and that source needs a header, I do that one first. Just get it out of the way. It's kind of necessary. It's always going to be there. I don't want to screw with it. In-game includes go next in alphabetical order. So game world followed by the settlement controller are both necessary. And I try not to double up on any of these. So if it's in the header file, I try not to also include it in the source file if possible. Though that just kind of happens because sometimes I'm an idiot and forget I've included things already. And finally, the third set is any engine things it needs. So specifically, C4 configuration is an engine-based include. And because it's engine-based, it sits in its own section, and it will also be in alpha order if there was more than one. So like the villager controller, you can see here's the villager thing, here's my in-game includes, and then I have my engine includes. Helps me not lose my mind when I'm doing things. Dan saying, I don't get how you can remember all the commands and scripts for yourself. It's really just experience and time spent doing stuff. I spend a lot of time programming, so for me this is kind of second nature. The same way that somebody who speaks French on a regular basis will have a bigger vocabulary in French than, me who knows all of, 3 words in French, right? I can call someone my sweet little, red flower or my sweet cauliflower, thanks to TF2, and that's pretty much all the French I know. I think I also know how to say I speak French, which is really ironic because I can't. It's just one of those things, though. It's like any other language or thing you do. Somebody who's good with spreadsheets will know all the Excel commands, versus I don't know shit when it comes to Excel. It's just, I'm not good at that. So that's really what it breaks down to, is just usage and time, really. Yaki, thanks for getting to Rafix's question. Basic stuff, but still good to know. C++, Visual Studio, all that good stuff. C++ is definitely one of my main languages, so this is kind of my way through. And Tomlix has got it really right. It's just, I've seen people who keep a second monitor, if only just for like, oh, here's my documentation page of all the functions I may use. And it's really cool to have that alongside, because it makes your life a lot easier in terms of, oh, I need to know how do I do this? And you can quickly search through and be like, oh, okay, how does this does this. Okay, good. Browser windows are also pretty freaking common, because you find that a lot of people will need, standard STL stuff lives in, easy browser capable documentation. A lot of times you'll see me pull up the C4 engine documentation, and then I'll be like, alright, I need to know observable. What does this do? And so inside here, now I've got my docs. Here's what my functions look like if I need to know how to call something. Here's the innards of it, although usually the IDE has my back in that case, so it makes life a little bit easier. Urban Mango, yes. I thought I was calling her something different when I called her Mon Petit Chou-Fleur, but apparently I was just calling her my little cauliflower, which kind of fits. I thought I was calling her my little red flower, because she's a redhead, so I thought I was being like sweet and kind of personalizing it. As it turns out, that's Mon Petit Fleur Rouge. Oops. Oh well. Learning French is harder than learning English? Probably. I don't know, it depends. English kind of... Also, it helps that when you're learning a lot of this stuff, all I have to do is start typing, and if I have a general idea of what I want, if I start typing correctly, then the IDE is going to fill in the blanks. So if I want to get the node's type, okay, I get the target node, that's easy enough, and then get node type. Hey, here's the function. Or if I want to get the node's transform, like all of it lives in the IntelliSense, and that makes life a lot easier. What do I think about Java? Tastes good. That's really the easiest way for me to diffuse that situation. I don't want to even go into that. I have a lot of thoughts on Java. Most of it is caffeine related. Where did I learn C#? C# was also university classes. I took a class called CS20, was Introduction to Game Design Experience. Or it might have been just Introduction to Game Experience. I don't know. Or to Design Experience? I don't know. Don't remember. But we made a game using XNA and C# in the course of a quarter. And so that was an interesting thing to learn in a very short period of time. Alright, looks like I'm finally caught up with all the questions, comments, and things that folks are talking about. We have quarters. When a quarter gets created, it jumps into... Let's just watch this code run and see if this sucker goes. It'll probably crash somewhere because we created a lot of little bits and pieces that we need to deal with. And that's fine. Looks like it didn't. Although I'm also noticing my breakpoint didn't get caught. Oh, and I know exactly why. Whoops. I did not put the quarters controller on the actual controller file. I do need to add the quarters controller, and this is one of those cases where this got a little messy, and I really don't like it when I do that. A, B, C, D. Also, E comes before G, JJKQ, cool. See, like, okay, I know all this language stuff, and then you ask me about my freaking alphabet. My alphabet, of all things. And I have to sit here and go, GHIJKLMNOPQ, cool, cute, that's where I am. Like, that's... If some officer asked me to say the alphabet backwards, I would be so screwed. So incredibly screwed. It's not even funny. Funny thing is, if an officer asked me about the first digits of pi, oh, I've got that down. I used to know it further, too. I only know... I'm now to the point of, like, 3.1415926535889. I used to know a couple more digits, but I think I forgot them. I'm getting old, guys. I'm getting old. Ah. Alright, let's assign that controller. I'm done screwing around. Back to work. Crack the whip. Quarters controller. There it is. And if we did this right, 3.14159.2... That looks incorrect. I could swear it was 2653589. Pi digits. 100,000 digits of pi. 3.14159.26535. Yeah. Haha! Incorrect. I have got it correct, right? 3.14159.2... Ah, nope. You missed a 6 in there. And for some reason, it's going to log me out of chat. Thanks. Wait, really? I can't talk in my own chat channel? What the heck, Twitch? That's not nice. Okay, one sec. I gotta relog into Twitch chat, apparently. Sorry, guys. 265358. There we go. That is what I know. You're missing the 6 after 3.14159.2. Oh well. Alright, back to work. So we've got our quarters controller. We need to tell it, you can, holy crap, you can hold 4, I'm going for 4 here. 4 people. So I close it. Now we can see, I don't know why preprocess is getting called. That's interesting. Oh, when you change settings inside geometry objects, it feels the need to reprocess, I should say, its stuff. Okay, I need to put a, oh crap. I think it's a manipulator object that is attached. And that only works if you are in the editor. So if the manipulator exists, so if it doesn't exist, here's the thing that matters. There we go. So if the manipulator doesn't exist, we're not going to call these parts of the function because we are going to want to avoid calling into some of this stuff because it obviously causes us to crash. Something I'll have to keep in mind in the future too. That's kind of a pain. So controller, quarters, 4. Done. And if we double check, 4 is still the correct number. And now that I've hit save again, it crashes in the packing function. Whoops. Because, something to keep in mind, when it asks you how many bytes you're going to write, don't say 1 and then write 4. Size of, if we want to get really picky here, we'll do this. Whoopsies. Don't mind me, guys. Just making amateur mistakes, one after another. Granted, we've been at this for 3.5 hours, which isn't too bad. Still. Okay, it's saved alright. Save it to our model resource. Close this out. And now, game loads. When I tell him to build it, he walks into the center. Whack, whack, whack. It's up. I didn't see the preprocess function get called because I accidentally moved the breakpoint. Let's just do this again. You, build me another house. Good sir. Okay, I'm not seeing these controllers get created. That's somewhat frightening. We need to double check that these continue to exist. Quarters. You do have this controller still, right? And it still has 4. Why aren't you getting created? So this will be a game for the Xbox 360? No, probably not. Mostly because my only access to the Xbox before was through the C# and XNA stuff. And without doing this game in C# and XNA, I actually don't really have another avenue to get this out there. It's really bizarre. I'm not... Oh, of course, that's why I'm not seeing the pre-process function get called, because I'm not breaking inside any of this. Quick, build me another. Ah! No. Dang it. So it should be instantiating this controller. I don't understand why it wouldn't. I don't really have a move function that I can check if it exists inside. And the villager probably, let's see here, handle settlement. Here we go. Here's the function I really care about. Is he being told? Oh, but he's also probably getting removed from the list, isn't he? No, he wouldn't be, because we haven't marked a way for someone to know if they're not homeless anymore. So let's make sure that code ends up in here too. Bool is homeless. Wonderful function I never thought I'd end up writing. Return whether the, not the settlement, the home. Really? Do I not have a node for this? Or not? The settlement housing controller. Sorry. Return housing controller is a null pointer. Because if it is, the guy's homeless. Right? Straight up, easy fact, we can check. When the settlement controller so we tell everybody about it. Ah, and then the villager should be unregistering himself. Ooh. But something to keep in mind. So this is why I'm doing this. Crap. So the problem here is I'm using a standard for each loop, right? If somebody in the process of handling an event says, hey, I need to remove myself from the list of people who are homeless, there's now this kind of new problem where even a standard for loop or a for each loop would say, hey, you are modifying the array mid-loop, which is going to be a problem. How do we get around this? We have to check after each person if the size has changed. That's really the only way to do that. And we need a standard for loop to do this now. Otherwise, problems abound. So we need to say in our housing interest array, how long have I been making this game? Dan, I've been making this since last November, I think? So Thorana makes a good point. Instead of sending the entire array, send an open housing that fits the possible tenant. So the person would then say, I need this many housing slots. And then the settlement controller would say, okay, this one's for you, and would make the match, essentially, between the two. Yeah, that would be a lot cleaner. That'd be a much better way to do that, I think. So we're going to go through each person. Yeah, for now we're just going to do this. Once again, a lot of this code is dumb right now because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be taken into consideration in the final product. For example, if I work near that building, what I might want to do is say this family over here needs to move over here because it's closer to the guy's job. So I will move this family here and then say this one is now open. And having the settlement controller handle all of that, I think will do a better job than pushing more logic into the villager controller. So I think this is really, really what we need to do. So settlement controller says, I've got a new house. The villager then says, A, I'm homeless, and B, for now I'm not actually going to put the family size stuff in, but we'll deal with that later. Let's see here, the settlement controller. So you're going to go and say, I've got this new piece of housing. So let's, before we even add it to the open housing array, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can find somebody in the list that exists who wants this housing. So we're going to say, there we go. I just realized there was a huge bug sitting in there, but that's not a huge problem. So for each person who's interested in housing, who is actively interested, right? This is different from a passive interest, somebody who already has a home and doesn't really give a shit if a new one gets built immediately. The housing interest array, we're going to grab that villager. And let's see here. We've got a new set of quarters, so we're just going to try and fill that if we can. So implement of war, the real question is, does it count as unemployed if I have a job that's starting soon? I technically signed the offer letter. I'm as good as employed. I just don't start until March 9th. So am I still unemployed? I've been fighting with that one a lot. That's been an odd question. When people ask, oh, how's your job? It's like, which? Because I got a couple now. Because here's the weird part. I am still currently employed by my previous employer for this and next month. So I'll have 2 salaries next month. I'm now in this weird situation where I'm not quite sure where I land on the employment scale. I wish I could mark myself as unemployed and collect unemployment, but unfortunately my previous employer has said, for the next 2 months, you are still employed by us. You just don't have to do anything, which is kind of a dream job, right? So, let's see. By weird, I think you mean amazing and bursting with free money. Very true. Very, very true. I'm using a lot of that time and money to work on my kitchen and get kind of the house in order and cleaned up before I go back to working the old 9 to 5, which by 9 to 5 I mean more like 7 to 3 or 6 to 2, depending on when I feel like waking up. Dukos, Dukos? I think that's how I say it. My new job is I work as a Unity developer for an educational game studio. That's kind of where I've fallen. It's technically a stealth startup somewhere, but if you were to summarize my post, I am an educational games programmer that uses Unity. Thus, a while back when I got stuck with this project, I actually ended up swapping over for a little bit to just do some Unity re-education so I could remember what was what in Unity. But it's fun. Renter, I'm employed. Where do you sign up? You know, I've never been in this situation. I couldn't tell you how to get into it. It just kind of happened. That was my severance. So instead of just straight up laying me off, what they said was, we're going to keep you hired for the next 2 months, but you don't have to do anything for us. So instead of just a chunk of, here's all your vacation and 2 months of pay, and just give me a fat paycheck, they're keeping me on the payroll for 2 extra months, or they kept me on the payroll for 2 extra months so that I could continue to answer questions and be helpful if they needed me for, say, some code I wrote a while back. We don't understand how this works. Could you do a phone call with this engineer and tell him what the heck you're up to? That was kind of the thing I was doing. So get, let's see here. So the person needs to, let's see, so we need some kind of like set new housing inside the villager controller. I don't think new needs to be a part of this function name though. Also housing, C4 controller pointer. This is our quarters controller. Housing controller is the quarters controller right there. Set housing quarters. And also the quarters, we need to add a tenant. Or register a tenant. That's our housing interest array thing there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove them from the list right now. Housing interest array, remove element I, minus I. And eventually there will be some some very real if statement that says like if quarters get available, what was the word? Get available space. Okay, I was using the word space. If this is greater than or equal to the housing, or I guess I'll just pseudocode this a little. Villager needs ... And then the other thing to do is we need to break out of this if the house becomes full. So if the quarters get available space becomes 0. If we want to be stupidly safe, we can say less than or equal to 0, although I don't think that'll ever be the case. Then we just need to break out of this loop. If bunk is full, cuddle. Yeah. Yeah, it's Unity, but at the same time, for a startup to make a game, and for a fairly simple game, such as what most educational games end up being, Unity is really the way to go, especially if you're in a prototyping stage where you're like, we need to try this new mechanic out, but we don't want to dedicate all our resources to getting the mechanic installed. Then Unity really is the way to go, at least in my opinion. So we'll see. Yeah, being a freelancer is really interesting. One of my previous college roommates is now freelancing as a game developer, and it's really, really interesting because he ends up doing this weird mess between... He currently, first off, he's freelancing for 3 different jobs. This is the guy who's, if he had time, would be helping me out with this game. So that's kind of the first thing, is you're like, well... It's really interesting because he's got 3 different jobs, and they all ask for different amounts of his space. And so the weird thing is, here we go, let's see, add element quarters. There we go. So that's the first thing, right? You say, okay, you can have multiple jobs, and you have this weird system where he can allocate his time between the jobs, and as long as he survives and gets work done that every job finds amenable to their agreement, he can have 3 different little mini salaries coming in. Granted, you get paid less because, you know, as a contractor, it's time-based and all that. But it's still interesting to see the change in kind of between me, who likes to work salaried jobs, just single 8-hour day, whatever hours, versus his idea of working where it's like, oh, well, this company needs 3 hours of my time today and another company needs the other 5. Or, hey, this company wants 12 today and the other companies get 0. And that's just kind of how he runs with it. He's got better time management than I, though, so he can pull that shit off. I don't think I could. Alright, so when you register open housing, we just go through the list of everybody who may want housing, and the hope is that if we find that we either run out of people to satisfy, then we're going to add the house to the open housing array. So we've still got extra houses left over, or we've still got extra space left over. The other thing to do with this settlement controller is we actually need to take this and make it more interesting as well. Where if somebody joins the housing interest group, and I'm just going to, what order did I write these in? Open housing comes first. Okay, cool. Also, what the heck? There we go. Void settlement controller, register housing interest. And that takes a villager controller. Okie doke. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to say, first we're going to look through the list of all open houses. If we can fit him in one, we'll do that immediately and then remove the open house from the market if the house gets filled. Otherwise, we'll put him onto the housing interest array list. So the 2 arrays should always, one should always be empty as long as there are elements in the other. And so what you end up doing is you end up with, you know, either houses start to build up, and then as the houses start to empty out, when houses hits rock bottom, that's when the villager side will start to fill up if you have a bunch of homeless people joining. Oof. Yeah, and see, that's why I can't quite handle a non-salary job. Doing freelance, I hear you get a lot of freedom, but at the same time, it kind of, without the time management skills, I would be lost. And without the ability to say no to some people, I would end up working crazy hours, and that's not really what I want either. So, enough babbling about that aside, though. Into I equals 0, I is less than, I shouldn't call it babbling, it really isn't. For each open house, actually I shouldn't even do that. I should just say if we can fix this later, because once again, we're just trying to get this working. And no, let's do it right the first time. Right the first time so that we don't have to come back and futz with this later. So for every open house, and then once again, imaginary if statement, if the open housing array I get available space is greater than or equal to the villager needs, and then we're going to take the open housing array, and we're just going to immediately register the tenant with the villager being passed in. And then the other thing is that let's see, sorry, brain skipped a couple clock ticks. I lost a few frames. Let's see here. We register the tenant. Oh, and then the villager. Sorry, there we go. Set housing to the open housing array I. Open housing array I. Remove. Nope. remove element at I, minus minus I. And honestly, anytime we do this, we should break immediately afterwards, because the moment we find a group in which the house fits, we then just break out of our for loop. So once again, remember, imaginary if statement here. That's why this looks so bizarre. Threnna, thank you again for joining me. I'm very glad to have your help along. Sometimes I just need a little bit of logical backup. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Those of you who are joining for the first time, haven't been able to see one of these before, if you like what you see, or if you're interested in kind of this style of making games, then please feel free to hit the follow button below. And you'll see every time I go online, and you'll get to see me make some of this game and watch it kind of progress along. And the big thing here is that while you guys may or may not... What? Unreachable code. Oh. Don't care. Do I care? I care enough. I care just enough. If open housing array get element count is greater than 0, let's do this instead. And then you go there, and that goes there. Also, I should probably not be... Okay. Because I use I everywhere, though. There we go. Cheap fix for now. Alright. Dum-dum-dum. So if we find a house for this guy, we stick him in the house, and then we kind of say, cool, we're done. If you're homeless still after this, then we're going to put you in the list of people who are interested in looking for housing. Yaki, thank you very much for going over post and prefix definitions. Those are definitely... it's funny. It's something I do that causes a lot of people pain in terms of all the stuff that I do. So thank you for explaining that. There is a slight difference, ever so slight performant difference, but mostly it's just my coding style these days. A good compiler, which granted, I say that, there are bad compilers still existing out there. There are compilers that won't fix that on their own, but I kind of assume most do. I give compilers the benefit of the doubt, probably even when I shouldn't, which is fine. Okay. Finally do one last check here. I want to make sure that the pre-process in here, that near the bottom... Okay, I am not registering myself. That is a problem. Settlement, register, housing interest, me. Yes, okay, cool. Whew. Okay, so it gets built, and here you can see our quarters. Oh, this is so nice. So the construction controller is done. It's adding the new node to the world. There's no manipulator, so we are jumping in and grabbing the settlement and then registering ourselves. And we say, hey, look, there is somebody in the list of housing. So we are going to set that person's housing to this new house. The quarters then registers that tenant. We remove the guy from the list. And he's the only one in the list. It still has available space, so we add it to the array of places that have housing left. Whew! Doesn't look like much, but that's a lot of very important code that just got run. And it is fantastic to see that all running and working just fine. Whew! Alright, so we've got quarters in. Now, they're not taken into effect by AI. In fact, the AI kind of gives no shits whatsoever. So, the thing we want to do here, I'm not sure I want to plug it into the AI yet. Let me think about this for a moment. And also, you guys are going over prefixes and postfixes. The big reason that one is faster over the other, is one always faster than the other? No, it depends. But in like 90% of the cases, you're going to find that a prefix is faster, because what a prefix does, say this is what our prefix function looks like, right? Oh, come on. Visual Studio, play nice with me for a moment. So if this is ++ x, and we look at the code inside ++ x, what's going to happen is we do x equals x plus 1, return x. Right? Not much complexity in here. The postfix version, which has x++, is going to be a little, ever so slightly more complicated, because we have to grab the temporary version of x. We then say x equals x plus 1, and then we return temp. So notice how there's a little bit more work being done by the postfix than by the prefix. It's not a ton. Like I said, in most cases, this is so nil, it doesn't, like, the performance differences are so tiny, it doesn't even matter. It really won't. But it's just a matter of my personal style that I tend to prefix whenever I can, because it's just what I was kind of brought up doing. That's all. So yeah, this is kind of prefix versus postfix here. Return x equals x plus 1, or if you have to do the temporary storage, then do the addition and then return the temp. So there we go. Now to nuke those functions, get my code back to where it was. So we've got housing, which is cool. It's actually really cool that we have housing fixed in. And I'm actually going to go so far as to even commit the shit ton of changes. We also need to make sure that the quarters files make it to the SVN server. So also all the new files. I want the Blender file. I don't want the OGEX file to make it though. So we're going to ignore that one. But all these other, that's a lot of changes. What is in here? Oh, I've just turned off, okay. Fix, spelling corrections. Adds registration-based housing, and the quarters build button now exists on the window, on the build window specifically. There are some other things in here. Let's see here. For example, the build tool is now, or I guess I should say, the old, what was it, build shed tool has been repurposed. Really? Oh, that's why. Has been repurposed as a general construction tool. What else? Do we have anything else that we got done today? I don't think so. Split files or split controllers into their own files for circular dependency reduction, or I guess dodging. Game tools input. What did I do in input? Okay, yeah. Cool. That's kind of everything right there. That was a lot of work we just got done. And so let's just... Whoa. Quarters.blend is out of date. The directory... What? You have to update my working directory. Really? I shouldn't have to. Okay. Bizarre. Thanks, SVN. You're great. Anyway, so just to kind of quickly look at the game world again and kind of what we've got going on. So we still have our basic mission system, which is really cool. And what I at some point want to do, I wonder if the scout area still works. It should. It honestly should. It might take him a while to come back if I do something like, say, walk to 4-4 and then scout to a depth of 5. But hey, let's send him off and see what he does. Also, his move to location still uses straight point-to-point walking. I don't think it uses any pathfinding yet, and we need to fix that and get that added in. So that's kind of on the list. On the list of things that we need to get done at some point. I kind of saw him wandering around here in this upper corner, so I'm guessing he's just like exploring here. Oh, and here he comes. So when he gets back to what is World Center right now, all this space will become visible. Ta-da! And you can see he kind of wandered around, checked things out, and came home. It's actually really cool. I was really happy that that bit of code worked out so well. That it still works. Still runs. So yeah, oof. Let's see here. Do I take a break and keep going, or do we just call it a day is the question. Because we're making a lot of good progress. We're doing a lot of stuff today that it looks like all of my buildings have this same problem. That they all, when the fog shows up, the fog seems to be kind of taking over the actual building, which is unfortunate. Let's see here. We could put down a generator maybe. Attach some power lines. Of course, it doesn't look like any power lines made it to that one. Nope, nope, there we go. There's some power lines. Eventually, this is on the list of features. That I'll actually get working and make feasible instead of it's just right now a graphical piece of candy that you can kind of slap those down and it looks nice and that's about it. So let's see. Things going on. We've got this stuff done in terms of... I'm actually going to break open Trello for a moment and look at my to-do list. So we've got placement for ghosts to other buildings, player to rotate, placement ghost. That's not done yet. Buildings, the quarters are done. We have made a little bit of progress today. What else? That was really it. Bizarrely enough, one little checkbox, right? There's a bunch of code behind that checkbox that definitely needed to happen. Also, the other thing to note is that at night, the buildings are much darker than the rest of the terrain, right? Even without much light being shed on them. You'll notice this dark side of the house before the white kind of consumes it. Before the fog, I should say, consumes it. Huh. Is he dead or is he... Yeah, he's dead. He apparently didn't go out and get any food before he died. Unfortunate. So let's see. We've got quarters. We've got... What else? What else can we get done? look back at that to-do list. More buildings. We could do more buildings. A lumber yard. I don't think